Hi, welcome to a new video of mine. It's been a while, to be honest. This is my first video in 2025. Two reasons. I've been kind of in a reading slump in the first months of 2025, so I've been reading a lot for work, but not very much for myself. And second of all, I've been a bit too busy to make videos, but now I really want to keep going. And yes, I hope you enjoy. And obviously, we have to kind of recap what I have been reading, which isn't a lot, but we're gonna go through them. And yeah, to kind of get me out of this reading slump, I have been reading a couple of very popular books, and some of them really have been a hit and some of them not so much. So yeah, let's go through them. And to start with kind of an honorary mention, because technically I've started the series in 2024, but this is Beartown and Us Against You. Beartown I finished in December, but Us Against You was this year's, and I really want to talk about these books because they're so fantastic. Fredrik Backman is kind of my new favorite author, although I've only read like these two books of him, but I've pre-ordered his new novel, My Friends, which I'm so hyped, and I also have the third book in the series left, so I'm just excited. It's like one of those authors I know I'm gonna love it, so I don't mind waiting a bit longer and kind of savoring the idea of some Fredrik Backman novels still to explore. And he has so many that I haven't read, for example, Anxious People or A Man Called Off. And I've heard so many great things about them, and I loved the two books I've read already from him, so I just know it's gonna be fantastic. So I'm not even stressing about like reading the third book as soon as I can, because I know it's much longer than these two, and also it will be the end of the series, and I don't know if I can stand that. So I'm kind of putting it off. But yeah, let's talk about these two. So Beartown was kind of popular 1 or 2 years ago. I've seen the cover, I've seen people rave about it, but I've never once read what it was about. So it never really occurred to me to read it. But then I just picked it up for some reason. I don't even know anymore. And then I opened the book, and it is about hockey, which is like one of my favorite sports. I'm a fan of two sports. One is the NHL and the other is Formula One. And I've opened this book and it was like, wait, if someone had told me this is about hockey, then I would have picked it up way sooner. But this is about so much more. It's basically taking place in this little town in Sweden called Beartown. It is small, basically all it has is hockey, and it's about the families living there. It's about players from the junior team, children, basically. It's about the general manager, the owner of the team, school teachers, bar owners, and there's so many different characters, and he really switches between the characters a lot. It's not like Game of Thrones, we have one chapter for one character and then we move on to the next. In one chapter, he sometimes switches from paragraph to a different character and kind of delves into their mind, and then 2 sentences later he's back to someone else. But it's so well connected, and you just love every one of these characters so much, apart from one maybe. And he's so good at writing like one-liners that bring you to tears, and I have so many examples on it. It's very well tapped, this first book, because like every other sentence is quotable, and you can just annotate the whole book because it's just that good. The writing is just fantastic. And it's basically about this hockey town and the people living in it and living for the sport, because the town and the well-being of the people is very much dependent on how well the hockey team does, because of sponsors and people moving away when the hockey team doesn't do good, and there's just not that much money in the city. And kind of very early on, the city is described as roads just going through the town to go somewhere else, but barely people will go to this town because there's just not a lot of things going on there apart from these few people. And something very, very bad happens in the middle of the book, and it's kind of this one thing that happens just one night, and how this little town copes with the tragedy. And it's kind of like those few people in this town really represent the whole world and just all of society. And it's so heartbreaking to see, because most of those characters, they make mistakes, they do bad things, but Fredrik Backman writes characters in a way that you think, wow, if I was in that situation, I would have done the same mistakes, or I would hold the same position. But as a reader, you kind of loathe them because you're not them, but you kind of understand them. And he writes with such empathy. I don't want to talk about Us Against You or the plot, because obviously it's a continuation of the story and I can't talk about it without giving spoilers. Just let me read a couple of quotes from this book, because it really, you have to read it after because they're so good. Hate can be a deeply stimulating emotion. The world becomes easier to understand and much less terrifying if you divide everything and everyone into friends and enemies, we and they, good and evil. The easiest way to unite a group isn't through love, because love is hard. It makes demands. Hate is simple. So the first thing that happens in a conflict is that we choose a side, because that's easier than trying to hold two thoughts in our head at the same time. The second thing that happens is that we seek out facts that confirm what we want to believe, comforting facts, ones that permit life to go on as normal. The third thing is that we dehumanize our enemy. Everyone has 1,000 wishes before a tragedy, but just one afterward. This is also one I love. All adults have days when we feel completely drained, when we no longer know quite what we spent so much time fighting for, when reality and everyday worries overwhelm us and we wonder how much longer we're going to be able to carry on. The wonderful thing is that we can all live through far more days like that without breaking than we think. The terrible thing is that we never know exactly how many. What an uncomfortable, terrible source of shame it is for the world that the victim is so often the one left with the most empathy for others. So yeah, read those books. I mean, they will make you cry for sure, but in the best way. I had multiple breakdowns reading the first book and also the second. And for me, it's just inevitable for me when reading Fredrik Backman, because he's just so empathetic and he writes so many different characters so well, and they couldn't be more far removed from me and my lifestyle and just my human experience. But it's just so fun because all of these characters are so beautiful, and I have a thesis that you can fall in love with anyone if you just know them well enough and just know their pain and suffering. And I think a lot of ignorance and hate and just dislike comes from people not knowing other people, just not knowing them well enough. They don't know what they're struggling with. They don't know where their pain lies or what they're going through. And I think these are just books that really, really show you the pain of all those people and what they endure every day. So you cannot even help not falling in love with them because you just know their inner demons. There are couple characters that I love, especially, for example, Benji. Like, Benji has a special place in my heart forever. I think about this character and those books every week. Like, there's some quotes that are just on my mind all the time, and I just go back to these, just look through all my tabs, and I'm happy, you know? Fredrik Backman, how do you do that? Like, it's incredible. Another series where I've read the first two books but never finished the third is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. And actually, I've loved the first two books. I finished the first two books, immediately started the third one, and I think I've got to like 13%. But for some reason, I didn't continue, and I still want to continue, but it's been lying around for months, and I haven't. But yeah, I definitely want to do that still, because they're just so cute. They're so magical, and I can't even remember some plot lines from it, but it doesn't even matter because you just really, the book feels like the cover. It's just pink and magical and mystical and like a fairy tale. I think the book starts out with her sister marrying the man she loves, and she made a wish or like a bargain or a deal with the Prince of Hearts, who's Jax, to stop the wedding. But it, you know, obviously with like those wishes, it never goes the way it should. And I think they all turn to stone or something. I don't really remember. But basically she goes on this journey and this adventure and meets all those princes and, you know, sees magical things happening. It's very fast-paced and exciting. It's just a whole vibe, but a very good fast-paced plot comes along with it. So for everyone who just wants some escapism and some magical, mystical fairy tale world, I think this is the book for you, because it's just 6 months since I read the story. I cannot talk too much about the plot, but yeah, I would talk about it on this channel again when I've read the third novel and I finished the series, and probably that will kind of kickstart my brain to remember what was going on. So yeah, if that all sounds good to you, then you should definitely read the series. The next book I've read is actually a manga series and an anime, which is well loved by my boyfriend. This is Full Metal Alchemist. This is basically about alchemists, so we're in a world of alchemy. We have those two brothers, Eric and Alphonse, I think they were called. And they basically make a very stupid decision, doing some alchemy that you shouldn't. One brother loses a couple of limbs, the other loses his entire physical form and just lives in an armor, but he has no physical body anymore. And they're basically in search of a way to get his body back and to kind of return to normal. I mean, it's kind of what you expect from anime. It's very well drawn, it has pretty cool world building, and the story is sick. And the characters are also very lovable. It's fast paced, it's adventurous, and I've liked it so far. And I like the anime. But for some reason, I just didn't have the interest in continuing the story. But because so many people love it so much, I think I should give it another chance because I love Attack on Titan so much. It's one of the best stories I've ever read or, watched. And I think in that story, it's also kind of similar that in the first like 1-2 seasons, you think you know what's going on, but then it gets so much bigger and so much better. And you're like, how can anyone even come up with something great like that? And because so many people love Full Metal Alchemist, I think I should give it another try, but it's not that high on my list. It's not really a priority for me. So yeah, this is kind of right now on the sidelines. Then I've kind of went back to my roots, to my teenage, 13, 14 years old, and I've read Divergent, the first book in the series Divergent, because I've loved the movie when I was younger, but I've never actually read the books. I was obsessed at the time with like Twilight, Hunger Games, City of Bones, that sort. It was so good. But for some reason, I've never read Divergent. So I've rewatched the movie, read the first book in like one sitting on a Sunday, cozy on my couch. And I've also read a couple of short stories that I didn't even know existed. For example, there's one called Free 4, which is the knife throwing scene from the first novel from 4's perspective. And then there's also a short story collection of 4 short stories about 4, kind of his youth and his initiation to Dauntless and his kind of time before he met Triss. And then I started the second book, Insurgent, I think it's called. It was fine. I don't think it was worth the time anymore because I was like, on a Sunday, I was just so in the mood for something girly, old school, dystopian, classic, and that was good for that Sunday. But afterwards, I couldn't really care that much about the story. And I've also never watched movie 2 and 3. I don't know, maybe I will continue it at some point, but it's also something like that was just a guilty pleasure day for me, which I liked and which I loved, but not something that I'm like, oh my god, I have to continue now. I have it on my Kindle. Maybe the day comes when I'm on vacation or on the airplane, on the train, maybe I will go back to it. So I have it on my Kindle when the time is right. And then I've read a book for work, actually. It's a non-fiction book about neuroscience. It's called Brains and Balance by Dr. Rachel Barr, I think. Like I said, I read this for work and didn't pick it up myself, but I'm very glad I read it because it was super interesting. It's basically about how the brain works in modern times. So obviously the world is changing very quickly. We have new technology, we have TikTok and the Wikipedia and all of those sources and tools to use that make life easier for the human being. And the brain just doesn't develop as the technology. So she kind of gives very helpful insight into how the brain works and how we can kind of help our brain be a bit more healthy in times like these. There's so many interesting things in it, just things that we can do that sound so obviously and that I just don't do, For example, she talks about anxiety and just being anxious and depressed, and how movement can really help you with it. It's a thing, your grandma says to you when you're like, oh, I don't feel so anxious, just go for a walk, and you're like, what's walking gonna help with my mental issues? But it actually does. It is just so well researched and so well explained to just the normal person, because there's so many books about like specialists and scientists, and they have so much to say and they know so much, but they sometimes just don't have the patience of explaining that to someone who's not as smart as they are. But she does it so well, and I googled her, and I didn't know about her, but she has Instagram and TikTok, and she has been doing that for a while to kind of help teach people how the brain works and what you can do just to feel better and to work better as a person. So she does that very well. And if you just feel you can enhance your life a little and just sometimes feel a bit alone with navigating today's very fast life and want some tips on how to just feel better and less stressed and less depressed, I think this is a book for basically everyone, because it has just so many helpful tips and so many things that you should already know, because she explains so well why they actually work and why you should do them. It feels kind of silly not to do that. She really inspired me to lead a life that is a bit more healthy and a bit better just for my brain and my well-being. The next thing is also a book I've read for work, and it's surprising that so many good books came out of there. A genre and an author I would never pick up, and it's called Cold Eternity and is a science fiction space thriller slash horror book. So not really something I read, but this has been a surprise because it's been actually very enjoyable and very much filled with tension and fast paced and very good. It's basically about this woman called Hallie, and she's kind of on the run from this political scandal. She's basically trying to lay low and earn money. So she takes a job on this giant spaceship where they carry cryo-frozen bodies. And her job is basically to walk the halls and make sure everything is going smoothly. And she's completely alone on this ship. And the whole book is basically her being alone. I mean, she talks to people, but not in person. It's always just her. And for some reason, I didn't even notice because it's just so well made. And then the horror comes in and she kind of starts seeing things, hearing noises, and suspects there's a creature living on the ship with her, coming to get her. But she doesn't really have evidence and doesn't know what's going on. And that's basically what I want to tell you about, because I think it's good to go in that book blind if you're looking for something that has space and tension and a tad of horror. I don't think it's really that scary. It's just suspenseful. Yeah, if you're looking for something similar, this is the book to go. It's not that long, it's pretty short, and it worked really well for me. I think I wasn't bored for a second of this book, always trying to figure out what was going on. Yeah, so I really like that. And then, like I said, I wanted to read some popular books because I thought that would get me out of the slump. And that is, of course, The Ministry of Time by Haley and Bradley. I have heard so many people rave about this book. For example, Haley Pham has been talking so well of this book, and I've heard so many great things about it. And it's basically a time travel romance book, or this is how it's marketed at least, or that's how people describe it. But I think the time travel element is so much bigger than the romance part. Yes, there is a bit of romance in there, but not that much. So if you're looking for a romance novel with some time traveling in there, this is not the book for you. But this is also not what I've been looking for. And I have mixed feelings about this book for some reason, because I think it started out super strong. It's basically, the story is humanity has figured out time traveling, and there is a ministry that is just trying that out, and they've taken 5 people over the course of history and brought them to the present time. And every time traveling expat is what they're called, gets a person they're assigned to, and they live with them, and they trying to basically integrate them into the modern world. And we follow our main character, who gets assigned one of these time travelers, and it's very much, for the first 2/3, it's very much slice of life and just them hanging out and just him learning about technology and new things and everything. And it has a lot of heart and empathy, and also very funny at times. But in the last third, it suddenly turns into this spy thriller, very fast paced, and it just feels like a different book, you know what I mean? And going from this slice of life, very chill, just scenes of them living together, and then it goes into this spy thriller on the run. Everything is kind of going south. It was a very weird shift, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I enjoyed it for most of the book. I think it had some very good quotes that I really, really loved. And I'm going to read some of them to you. Belief has very little to do with rationale. Why demand a map for uncharted territory? The mole on his throat had me writing poetry. Holding me in his arms the way that poems hold clauses. In an era of mobile phones, there were only a few things that Mouthpiece would have heard: love and endings, panicked calls to the emergency services. Please, please, I don't know if he's breathing. I don't know if he'll make it. I don't know. I think her writing is very interesting. I think for me, sometimes it was a hit, like a huge hit, and then a miss. Like she loves her metaphors, and sometimes they're really good, and sometimes she's just trying so hard to compare something to something so different. I'm like, okay, if you want to lay it like that, I wouldn't, but okay. So sometimes her writing felt a bit off. It was on one page, it was fantastic, glorious. In other scenes, it was just a bit, okay, I don't know. Yeah, so me, it was kind of a bit disappointing because I've expected it to be a 5 stars, best book of the year, whatever. And it turned out to be pretty good at first, and then a bit of a letdown in the end. So of course, I picked up another huge hit on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere. Everyone loves this book, and it's getting turned into a huge movie. And this is, of course, The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I'm not one to read thrillers at all, because my problem with it is that if I start a thriller that I like, I will not put it down. It was helpful that I was sick at the time, so didn't have any work, and I read it in like 2 sitting because it was so gripping. And it's basically about this woman, I completely forgot her name, and she has been to prison. We don't know what she's done or why she was in prison. We just know that she was in prison, and she got fired from a small job she did, and she's living in her car, and basically her life is not very good. So she's applying at a couple of jobs, mostly as a maid, and she has this interview with this woman called Nina Winchester, and they own this beautiful huge house, and Nina Winchester looks put together and is very nice, and our main character basically doesn't think she will get the job, but in the end she does. She starts working there as a maid, and she also moves into the attic, and for some reason the whole house is very pretty, but the attic is super creepy. And there's so many red flags, like the gardener, for example, basically tells her that she's in danger working there. And there's so many things that tells her to go run. And as a reader, I'm like, girl, get out of there. But she's like, no, I need the money. I have to stay. So she starts working, and Nina has a husband who is very, very nice. Nina is very, very crazy. They have a daughter who is also kind of creepy, to be honest. And Nina just makes her life very, very hard. And she's just batshit crazy, to be honest. This is kind of just the premise of the book. But there's so many plot twists in there that you cannot see coming, and I really much liked it. It was just super gripping, super fast paced. You read it for the plot, not the writing, because the writing is very, very much average. But I didn't mind that. It was super easy to read. I just got through there super quick, and it was just so satisfying in the end. All the loose ties kind of connect in the end. We have a couple of revelations you don't see coming because you think, oh, the big plot twist, we have that behind us, but no, there's coming more. And I'm really looking forward to the movie. We have Sydney Sweeney, we have Amanda Seyfried, we have Brendan Sklanner. So yeah, it can't be bad. I hope so. And then another very, very popular series I've started is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This just tickled my brain in the right way because this is just romance, but in a fantasy setting. That's cool, I guess. It's really a romantasy where the romance is written in caps, and I was looking for something like that. I wanted to, really satisfy the teenage girl in me and wanted to read some giddy romance, and it delivered, it really delivered. We're basically following Peyton Gray, and she lives in this kingdom called Ilya, and we have elites, which are people who have powers. For example, they can throw around with fire, they're super fast, or they have healing abilities, or they can make themselves invisible, basically. And then we have people who are ordinaries. People who have no power at all, and they are kind of illegal. They're illegal to be around. If someone notices that you are an ordinary, you will get executed. And Peyton sadly isn't ordinary, and she kind of lives in slums of the city and just tries to survive. And then basically by accident she saves the prince of Ilya, and she gets thrown into this trial tournament. It's pretty similar to Hunger Games. So we follow her in those trials, and with her in the trials is the prince she saved, which is the future enforcer of the king. His brother will be the king one day. And we just, follow her along, being in the palace, training, going through those trials and having great banter with Prince Kai. It's this really classic dynamic of them being kind of enemies, kind of rivals, but like not really. They have good banter and they pretend kind of to be enemies, which they kind of are because of the trials, but there's no really rule against it. And I love Peyton because she's so fierce and she's a survivor because she literally survived her life as an ordinary among all of those powerful people. And she's witty and feisty. I like the writing, also not world changing, but I think it just hit the spot for me, and I really love that. And I've also read the second book and now wanting to really badly read the third. I think the second book was not as addicting as the first. It's pretty much Peyton going from here to there and from there to here and then to there and then back to here. And it's a lot of moving around, again, banter and romance and stuff, but not as gripping as the first, I would say. But I'm really hyped to read the third book because at the end of the second there's something happening that I didn't really expect, to be honest. I don't know why, but I didn't expect it and I don't want it to happen. So reading the third book probably in the next couple of days. And the last book I want to talk about is another book I've read for work, which is called The Unwedding. And this is also a thriller, so again, something I don't really read, but because I've talked about so many thrillers in this video, I'm really debating on maybe this is a genre that I like. So this book is basically about this middle-aged woman. She and her husband booked a vacation to this resort in Big Sur, California for their 20th wedding anniversary, but a couple of months before that they have divorced. But the vacation is already booked, so she goes alone. And at that resort are so many different people. Ironically, there's also a wedding happening there, and she just meets a lot of different people, and then someone dies. Someone is dead, and this is amid a huge storm. So all the bridges leading to the resort are kind of not passable. So no one can go anywhere. It's raining and storming the entire time. The people working and staying at this resort are basically trapped with a body. Our main character, Allery, she's trying to talk to people and trying to figure out what had happened, and another person dies, and they're basically living with a murderer there and staying there, and nobody knows who done it or what's going on. It feels kind of like an Agatha Christie or like a Knives Out situation where she's kind of trying to play detective and figure out the pieces and puzzles, which she's surprisingly good at. For some reason, she memorizes every detail she's picked up from everyone, which is not relatable at all because I forget everything, but she's very good at that. So we basically follow Allery playing detective and trying to solve the murder case. And it felt very low stakes for some reason, although there are people dying, whereas the housemaid really gives you this creepy, suspenseful feeling. The Unwedding really doesn't do that, but it's still a page turner. You still want to find out what's going on, but it doesn't really feel like, oh, who's gonna die? It's basically just putting the pieces of the puzzles together, and I think that was fun. And I think it was way better in like the first 2/3, but the resolve, what actually happened, not that satisfying, to be honest. I feel like it could have done better, but still I had a fantastic time reading it, and I wanted to know what was going on, and I forgot that I was working, and that's always a good sign. So yeah, The Unwedding, for anyone who loves thrillers and murder mysteries, I think it's a perfect book. Again, not groundbreaking, but still a pretty good time. So yeah, that basically concludes all my reading for the first 6 months of 2025, and it's kind of a shame because looking back, the last couple of years, I've read more than 100 books in a year, and I'm not even close to doing that again this year. But, it's not about that. And right now, I'm really getting back to my usual reading tempo because I really found my love for reading again. And right now I'm reading all the time and finishing book after book after book. And it's just so fun. I'm not trying to look at the numbers and at the stats, but I'm just really glad that I'm reading a lot again. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic week.